of the greatest thinkers, the only podcast where you can see the greatest minds of all come together to see whose contribution were the most important to history. I'm your host for today, Mary Somerville, physicist, mathematician, philosopher, and many things in between.
Let's also not forget the origin of the term scientist.
And hi, I'm Tom Scott.
Right you are. Today we have two very different guests with us today. Michael Servetus, a pioneer in the pulmonary biology field, born in the 16th century Spain. Lovely to have you here, Michael.
Thank you, Mary. Pleasure being here.
Hailing from the Seljuk Empire, our second guest was born in the 11th century in now what we refer to as Iran. Their works not only paved way for mathematicians and astronomers but also heavily defined Persian philosophy and literature at the time. Of course, this is none other than Omar Khayyam.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Mary.
Of course, today's episode is a bit of an interesting one because we won't be talking about anyone outside this room. You both were exceptional in your own right, but hail from such different circumstances that you often aren't discussing the same conversations. So we want you to settle the debate on whose influence was most impactful.
Will you be throwing a hat into the ring alongside us, or is this a two-horse race?
I'll join in on the festivities as well, although that might make things a bit one-sided.
I think not. Apologies, Mary, but not all are chosen by the divine to reveal the true scientific spirit of the universe. I spent my life moving the overturned window of science away from the divine ethos-centric reasoning towards a method of observational inquiry. My work was so revolutionary that it had me labeled as the heretic and burned at the stake. For all your contributions to your field, neither of you pose such a fundamental threat to the accepted way of people's lives.
That's well and good, Michael, but you're not the only scientist accused of being a heretic. I spent the tail end of my career marred with accusations of unorthodoxy and Zoroastrian sympathy. The fact that you didn't have the tact and wherewithal necessary to avoid being burnt at the stake is not a sign of your scientific prowess, it's a sign of your inability to be able to navigate the sensibilities of your time. That's a mark against you. As a matter of contributory scale, my works define everything from Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry, geometric algebra, binomials, and many more fundamental axioms of mathematics. Not to mention my work on the Jalali calendar, which mapped the length of a year more accurately than even the Gregorian calendar that emerged 500 years from there.
Hold on there, Omar. This really is not a fair comparison. You had tutors who tutored the highest nobility as your mentors, okay? You received patronage and support from a number of rulers before landing into the court of Malik Shah, the ruler of the entire Seljuk Empire, okay? You can't assess contributions without taking into account circumstances that aided or impaired you into coming to them.
I hate to interject, but if we care about unyieldingly cold circumstances, no one here deserves more credit than I. 19th century Scotland was unforgiving. Unlike the two of you, I was barred from any more than the most basic formal education because I was a woman. And even my family opposed my academic passions. I spent countless nights teaching myself the sciences in secret under candlelight, only to find myself barred once from the scientific circles and institutions. I fought through every barrier and obstacle to carve a place for women within those spaces and become one of the first to gain membership to the Royal Astronomical Society. I was the first to sign on the 1866 petition for women's right to vote. My work paved the way for our modern understanding of the sciences as interconnected fields and defined the way scientific curriculums were written for decades to follow. So I hate to say, but you're wrong.
Now, Mary's story is surprisingly modern. She didn't just do research, but she focused on communication, making science understandable, accessible, and connected. That's basically the job of today's explainers, researchers, and YouTubers in general. But the difference is that Mary had to fight just to be allowed in the room. Today, the room is global, and anyone with just one internet connection can join.
Look, there's no doubt that you faced deep adversity, but the fact remains that none of your work could exist without the fundamental principles and foundations that came from the Islamic golden age of science. And my work was pivotal to it. If it were a matter of one's social impact, your legacy would hold far more weight. But this is a discussion about science as a field of practical study.
Typical of an institutional bootlicker. Your belief that science and social can be separated speaks to your fundamental misunderstanding of the view of the world.
I agree, but I'm surprised you think that way, Michael.
It's not unpredictable. My life's work on theology and conscience was ultimately rooted in an intersection between the scientific inquiry and the social. Also, I got bored after dying and started reading Foucault. Truly interesting stuff.
That would do it.
Look, I'll have to disagree with you for a second, but we can come back here because I want to talk about methods first. Well, ultimately, all of us employed some version of the scientific method in our endeavors. I would like to point out that I'm the only person here that can claim to have made a meaningful addition to the way in which we view methodological practice. That is, that the role of geometric construction of algebraic solutions within our modern understanding of mathematics only exists because of the work that I did within the field. Ignoring the fact that both of you ultimately just rode on the coattails of non-European thinkers, most of your work comes from some version of synthesizing or re-articulating pre-existing beliefs and works that came long before yourself in a way that was palatable for the people of your time, not doing anything that was meaningfully new or novel.
My good sir, you should not talk about things that you don't understand, okay? Not only was my critique of the Holy Trinity entirely novel, it ultimately heavily influenced the reinterpretations of Christianity. Even worse, you conveniently ignored the fact that my death laid the pathway for emergence of religious tolerance and freedom of conscience, which opened the floodgates for unapologetic scientific inquiry. My death was more consequential for modern thinkers than anything you imagined to accomplish in your hyper-specified fields that you devoted your lives to.
I second Michael here. Paving the way for those who came after is the fundamental obligation for all scientists. That said, I'd like to point out the ignorance in dismissing my life's work as a mere rearticulation. Not only did I translate and expand on critical works regarding gravity and the solar system, among so many others, I dedicated my life to making the theory intelligible beyond just the equations, explaining the works of Laplace in the common language. If today we see the sciences as a unified collection of workings that ought to be articulated intelligibly, it is inarguable that it is because of my life's work. This must be defining for what more noble endeavor is there than to give to others the immeasurable joy of scientific curiosity.
Alright, but have you considered...
Hang on, I think the producers are signaling time. Something about an angry mob outside? Well, I don't know which of us they're here
What this
for,
debate tells us
but-
is that scientific impact isn't just one thing. Is it discovering something new? Is it surviving persecution? Is it creating tools for others to use? Or is it making knowledge accessible? Today, we usually celebrate all of these, but we separate them into different roles. Researchers, activists, educators, and perhaps communicators. Back then, if you wanted to matter, you had to be all of them at once.
they're here for. But we should tune in next week for an episode with Aristotle, Einstein, and Fluid to discuss the most underrated scientific contributions. Goodbye.